Excellent. Well, this is one of a number of people that I'll be talking to who I have labeled AI change makers. And AI change makers are people that have spotted a problem and used AI to solve that problem. And for people like me, and for many people upskilling and trying to get ready for the AI age, I think stories like this are a great ways to inspire us with the good stories around AI and the people behind some of the solutions. So, John Pasmore, would you be able to introduce yourself to whoever's listening?
Absolutely. John Pasmore, I'm the CEO and founder of an AI platform called Latimer.ai. Yeah, we launched about a year and a half ago now.
Excellent. And just to show how exotic our various locations are at the moment, what city and country are you in?
I'm in New York City, here in the United States of America.
Oh, good. I'm glad you stipulated, just in case you didn't know where
Right.
New York was. Yeah, I love New York. I'm in Sydney, and I wanted to say exotic because it's chucking it down here, so it feels just like I'm back in the UK. So one does question their moves at some point.
There you
Um,
go.
so John Latimer got my attention when you were in the media about a year or so ago, and it was around the same time that I was coming over to San Francisco, and I was immediately drawn by one man who seemed to be on this crusade. So, can you tell us what the problem was, first of all, that you identified? And then we'll get into kind of what you did to solve the problem.
Sure. It's fairly simple in that the AI, I think, as we all know, has bias. I mean, it has many different types of bias, but in particular, the bias that I was concerned about was across really kind of, you could say, demographic lines. As for Black or brown people, some of the responses, especially when these platforms first launched, were infuriating and wrong. And as the father of a teenager, I thought that the last thing that we'd want to leave as a legacy is embedded bias in the very fabric of the technology that people would have to use on a day-to-day basis.
I really want to come on to the subject of fatherhood soon. Actually, I'm going to come back to that, but mainly in the relation to how we can shape the future better. Because I've been speaking to a few people about the driver that parenthood is to, get off your bum and do something because it's about the next generation, right? Um,
Absolutely.
but how did you discover the impact that that was having? Was that the experiment that you were making? Did you quite quickly see that, or was that in your business or academic world that you were seeing the scale of the problem?
I mean, I had gone back as an adult to Columbia University and got a computer science degree, so it really was pretty evident. And then, especially when all of these platforms first launched, just had to read, what was then, I think it was still Twitter, now X, so your social media feed was almost filled with these kind of gotchas where you could get the model to say crazy things. And, it still happens today. There are guardrails, but there's basically data, maybe data that was scraped from social media that taught the model how to speak or think. And a lot of that data has a lot of bias, as we all know when we go into social media we almost have to put our human guardrails up because there's going to be so much content that, you kind of become used to, but maybe in not such a good way that we see so much of this that we become kind of not offended by very offensive speech in many ways. But again, that's not what we want to leave the next generation to kind of sort through.
Yeah. And when it comes to the use of this, could you see the issue with bias scaling if it was embedded in large language models? Did you think that that was going to have a greater impact than already exists?
Well, we've seen that AI, in terms of scaling, right? It's migrating to healthcare. It's migrating to law enforcement, legal. So it's essentially going to be everywhere. So if there's an inherent bias, if by using let's say an African American name, now regardless, that model's now going to maybe not recommend this person for a job or not recommend this person for the same level of healthcare. I mean, that's incredibly troubling.
Yeah, a million percent. And I imagine the moment that you saw that with a computer science through that eye and about how it was only going to be stopped if someone with a computer science background was potentially going to do something about it. But then you also looked at it from a life point of view about, hang on, this is where it could impact, and this is why we need to go to the source.
It's also, I mean, to me, there was also and remains, it's a big kind of commercial opportunity because it's a big problem. And not that, Google with billions of dollars or OpenAI couldn't solve it, but as Young LeCun likes to say, who leads Meta's AI efforts, all of these platforms have some bias. So if your bias, let's say, is to, Western culture, or that, the US culture is really kind of a byproduct of European culture, and you're, dismissing African and Indian and Chinese and all the other ingredients that really were baked into actually creating the culture. Yeah, you can have that bias, but you're kind of giving people slightly inaccurate, responses.
Yeah, and a business doesn't want to be making inaccurate responses, but they are trusting sometimes what the technology is saying. And John,
Yeah.
what I often say to business leaders is it's not just the right thing to do, but if it'll persuade you, I'll tell you the size of the lawsuits that you will get and the number of them. I mean, these have started, and the amount of people that now know actually, well, I was probably rejected for this or couldn't access. I don't know if you know the story about the case in, I think it was in the UK, where a Uber Eats driver couldn't get into the app to work, and he claimed it was because of bias in the facial recognition. So it couldn't. And you have
Mm.
to use facial recognition to get into the app. Um, that's so damaging, brand damaging. It's damaging to the person, but there was a massive amount of money that had to get handed over. So it's also like just do it for. It's a commercial reason to address this as well as the right thing to do.
That's good reasoning when we're dealing with, folks that are really looking at the so-called bottom line, really is their motivating factor.
So let's talk about then what on earth you do about a problem like that. So now into the second part of this around the action that you took around that problem. And if you could step us through that, please.
Well, we built what's called a RAG model. So it's a model, or it's a database that sits on top of a model essentially. And that data kind of gives any foundation model that you access through Latimer a better perspective or more facts. In this case, we started with Black and Brown history and culture, so it's just more educated on the topic. We're looking at adding some indigenous tribes here in the fourth quarter in the United States. There's just so many examples of underrepresented groups really within the data set. And sometimes it's not even really just underrepresented. It might be that the model is just not weighted to give those groups kind of any preference or again, the models have a kind of a baked in bias.
Okay, so there's a couple of parts to it. There's accumulating the data, and so actually correcting the balance.
Well, in of itself, with a RAG model, because you've kind of created this extra database that sits alongside of a foundation model. The way that the model is constructed, it knows, well, this data that is in a separate database is obviously very important. So I'm always going to look at this particular data and give it a high priority. And it also kind of impacts how the model speaks, because let's say our data is more cultural and history. So if you're asking it, hey, how do I write this in Python? It's going to go to the Latimer database and say, well, we don't really have a lot of data on Python. So I'm going to go to the foundation model. But then it's still, these are conversational models. So it's still going to be speaking to you as it gives you your code, and how it speaks to you and the words that it chooses to engage with you, even if you're talking primarily about code, changes when there's a RAG model that maybe kind of gave it a slightly different perspective. I think, we saw that recently with ChatGPT 5, where a lot of people started speaking to it and they said, well, it seems really cold. And you can kind of change the temperature of a model as well to be more warm, more empathetic. And I think based on our data and the way that we've trained it, the model hopefully is always going to be more empathetic and more focused on people and more focused on, just really being a little bit careful with how it speaks to people. So not everybody looks at that as a benefit. We don't necessarily think of that as being woke, which has become a very bad word here in the United States, maybe all over the globe. But we just look at it as being accurate, number one, and then I don't think being empathetic should be a bad word, right? So those are two things that we want our model to be.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for being so trailblazing when it comes to empathy. Um,
Right.
so gathering the data, but also testing the responses in that as it is aside to the foundation model, if you like. Was that quite a long period of testing and training the data to work in that way, so that the balance was
I would say that
accurate?
it wasn't long, but it's a never-ending process because we're always uploading new data. There are always new algorithms that can check for bias. Bias is also can be very subtle. In some cases, if let's say the whole conversation is about women, you don't want the model to think, oh, we're not talking about men here, so there's a bias. You want it to understand the context of the conversation as well. So I think the whole field has grown a bit as we get more used to these models and how they think and how to modify how they interact with us. So it's been ongoing, and again, we're uploading new content every week.
Incredible. And so that I understand the foundation models, does Latimer work with all of the different models, or have you partnered with a specific foundation model?
Right now, if you sign up for a pro subscription with Latimer, you get there's 7 models that you can work with. So, 2 OpenAI models, 2 Google models, 2 Anthropic models, and then we downloaded Meta's model Llama. So that's a self-hosted version of what's essentially an open source model that we're working on. And we have some exciting announcements coming out next month about some other models that we'll be supporting as well.
That was incredible. I didn't realize you were going to list off so many there. So that's brilliant. I'll ensure that we get all of the details underneath to get people trying the pro account. Now, what barriers have you faced over this time? And I'm trying to put people, I suppose, to give you a little bit of context, a lot of people care about bias. A lot of people want to make the world better, but they don't necessarily know if they have got the skills to do that or what that will involve. Like, isn't AI what people like you do in America? Whereas I'd really like more people to feel equipped with some knowledge around what it means to lead change in the AI age. So what kind of barriers have you faced as you've worked developing Latimer?
Well, we formed the company. We launched Latimer January 2024. So we had the election for the current administration, but President Trump had not yet taken his seat. The inauguration came later. So, we started we started the company during the Biden administration, and have existed more so, I guess, in the Trump administration. And I would say that there's less focus in the current administration on some of the issues that maybe kind of support what we're doing. We've entered into a period in the United States where words like diversity and inclusion are often bad. I mean, whole companies have eliminated diversity, equity, inclusion offices, or face the wrath of an administration that feels that that's not the best thing for corporations to have. And that has, so we exist in a very polarized environment here in the United States. I'm not sure if that's the same in Australia or in Europe. In some ways, Europe is leading because there's more regulation that we're seeing out of the EU about AI and responsible and ethical AI. And I think on a weekly basis, we hear that there will be no regulation or as little as possible regulation around artificial intelligence in the United States because, often it's said that we don't want to, let's say, slow down the industry while, China or some other country is unfettered by those types of regulations so that we have to be completely, free market, which doesn't always, I think we should learn or maybe reflect on what happened with social media and was that really always great for young people? And was it great for our privacy? To see when your legislation or rulemaking really, really lags a new technology that, sometimes the bigger companies aren't really thinking about what's best for people. They're often just thinking about what's best for their bottom line. Certain companies are better than others. But that's something I think we as individuals have to be, we have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, so there's no sugarcoating it. They're big issues, aren't they? They are ultimately geopolitical circumstances, which many markets are facing in some ways. The challenge around diversity, around why just representation is a topic, and then regulation. And it's interesting you mentioned that because I heard a founder based here in Australia, Barb Hyman, who's got an HR AI business, talk about actually regulation can be a good thing for a founder because then it knows it helps. Well, this was her perspective. We now know the guardrails to operate and we innovate in that within those guardrails. Sometimes there's a little bit of fear about how to move forward if there isn't regulation. And I don't know what you think about that line. I found that a refreshing or very different take.
I think it would be helpful to know, what's the limit. We do have laws, right, that maybe kind of impact that, right? There's anti-discrimination laws. There are, so there are. I wouldn't say that it's a complete free-for-all, right? But in terms of specific AI regulations, a lot of states had made moves and made taken steps to regulate AI, and those I think have been paused on a federal level to say that's not something that we're going to allow to happen. So again, I just think that people have to be aware of what they're doing and what rights that maybe they're giving away. I think Sam Altman was, re-emphasizing the other day, the CEO of OpenAI, that hey, if we get a subpoena from, the police, we do have your chat history and we will share it with them. So, people maybe thought, oh, that's super private or they don't know what my history is, but of course they do.
Yeah, it's something that I sometimes worry about. Maybe not with the police, but just some of the chat that you have
Right.
with your AI assistant. Well, thank you. I think it's best to be really honest as well, to say there are a lot of problems that come with AI and the barriers, whether it's around regulation and the current market conditions, are real. And yet, wherever you are, I think understanding this landscape is the first very step. Understanding at least the issues, both for your own safety, and then if you think about from your family point of view and organization point of view, those are all AI change makers, if you like, for making this a more prosperous and safe age, even if it's not building a model and providing a big solution like you've done. Well, finally, thank you so much for your time. Where can we find Latimer? Because I've seen some exciting partnerships being announced, so I'm kind of leading you towards that if possible.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've announced a partnership with Grammarly, which we're super happy about. Really wonderful company to work with. Latimer is just www.latimer.ai. And please look us up. And I'm sure that this conversation helps to explain what we're doing. So I appreciate your taking the time for this.
Yeah, thank you. All the very best with it. It's just phenomenal what you're doing, and I'm so glad that you've taken the lead with it. So all the best.
Thank you so much.